For today's show, I had an extended conversation with an attorney from Charlotte, North Carolina, Boyd Rogers, where we discussed the impeachment trial of Donald Trump and a lot of the different issues relating to that. So here is the conversation we had. Enjoy. All right. Well, thank you, Boyd, for joining me and talking a little bit about impeachment and the impeachment trial for Donald Trump. I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts and talk through some of this with you. So first thought was, Chief Justice Roberts, he's not presiding. I think that could have gone to Kamala Harris after that as the president of the Senate. It's not. So I'm guessing that she probably, recused herself, which was probably a good idea. And now we've got Patrick Leahy, who's going to be presiding, where he voted to convict Trump last year, correct? Democrat. He's definitely kind of a critic of Donald Trump. Sure. What are your thoughts on that, on presiding? Like, first off, do you think we can read anything into the fact that Roberts isn't presiding?
I think we probably read into that the fact that for the first time in his life, maybe the justice was able to make a constitutional decision that didn't require a case to come to the Supreme Court first in terms of its formal procedures. I think the constitutional provision provides that, or at least he reads it as simply applying when the current president is being tried for impeachment. And as we know from the first impeachment and also prior impeachments, the role of the presiding authority, or in former times, the Chief Justice, is largely ceremonial. They try not to take a very big role in the proceedings, and so I don't read too much into that. I'm not sure that the provisions allow for Kamala Harris to even have had a chance to preside. I think it just automatically skips down to the President pro tempore of the Senate, who's Patrick Leahy, 80 years old, longtime senator from Vermont, Democrat.
Yeah. So I feel like you probably can't read anything into the fact that Roberts isn't presiding. But I do feel like if Roberts was 100% behind this and thought this was amazing and was so excited about it, he could have stepped in and said, yes, I'm going to do it. I don't think we can read anything into the fact that he's not, but I do think that if he was really gung-ho and thought this was incredible, he would be presiding over it. I'm not saying him not being there it means anything, but I think there could be, I don't know. And I heard different reports on how he's not presiding. Like, I heard some people say he had it relayed to people in the Senate that he wasn't interested in presiding. And I've read other reports where the Senate didn't invite him to preside. So I almost wish we would have seen something in writing from the Supreme Court where he just said, I am not presiding and this is why. But to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything. Yeah, it's just like whispers from different people, I guess. And now they're kind of relaying it to us. Yeah. But I really would have liked to have seen something, like from the U.S. Supreme Court, just an official word.
Yeah, it's possible we still may see that if the judges typically do not want to seek out attention and typically will not seek out attention. They don't necessarily like to do that. If the public continues to swirl around this particular issue, I would not be surprised if we did hear, in fact, from Chief Justice Roberts explaining why he's not presiding. Don't think it's that big of a deal per se.
So Patrick Leahy, he's presiding. Now, if you were a lawyer in a courtroom and he was the judge, you would immediately ask him to recuse himself, right?
It depends. I mean, I've been in court before judges who have ruled against my client numerous times during the course of a proceeding, and that doesn't necessarily mean that when push comes to shove that judge is going to rule against me again. Again, that role is largely ceremonial. It'll be up to Senator Leahy to be able to decide how he's going to play it. He could be seen as very partisan, or he could establish a really fair and even hand right there. I mean, he's got a legal background, so I think they've already got the appearance working against them, and it would have been better for public perception had Chief Justice Roberts decided to be there. But it's really in Senator Leahy's hands to be able to say, hey, to both sides, this is how it's going to be, and this is how we're going to proceed, and I'm not going to comment on anything, and I'll cast my vote when the vote needs to be cast, and that's it. So we'll see. I think he's probably capable of it, Wes, because he's beyond that group of current senators that are more attention seekers and TV grabbers. He's from sort of the old school Senate, where it was very gentlemanly and very refined and very much a debating society type of atmosphere, rather than the rancor and the partisanship you see today.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like with his background, I mean, like, yeah, it doesn't look good. I guess the optics aren't great that he's going to be presiding, but hopefully he'll be able to just be impartial and, and I don't know exactly what kind of role he would really play. Because I've heard that it's more of a passive role, but I'm guessing he's going to be doing something. Like, I don't know exactly if he could exclude testimony or, say like, we're done hearing on this topic, or if that's beyond him according to the rules of the Senate. I'm not really sure.
I would think, given what I'm hearing about what the defense for the former president is going to be, that he may have to make some evidentiary rulings, particularly on relevance. I mean, the charge is fairly narrowly drafted to one issue of inciting violence at the Capitol building, and it's possible. I mean, one of the greatest defense tactics there is in any trial is to try to decoy. It's to try to draw people's attention elsewhere. And the judge plays, in regular civil and criminal trials, a great role in making sure that only relevant evidence is brought before the tribunal. Otherwise, you could be there for days and days and days reciting Chicken Little poems or whatever you wanted to do. But so he may have to step in and do that. One would hope that the senators would take this proceeding in the manner that it's designed to be taken, which is a very serious judgment on a former public official, and act accordingly. Whether they will or not, I kind of doubt it. But if you remember, Wes, from the prior impeachment, they're required to be there, and they're not allowed to leave, and they have to basically sit in their chairs and not talk, which I'm sure drives a lot of them crazy. So what goes on inside the forum, inside the Senate chamber, is going to be much different from what you and I end up hearing in the halls of Congress and before the TV cameras later.
Yeah. They should have a camera behind all the senators, just so that we can see if there's like 10 of them playing Minesweeper.
Right.
six of them on Facebook.
They're going to have yarn on their fingers. They're going to be pulling things. It's like the old days.
Well, so we've had one question I wanted to throw to you is, we had 45 senators vote that it was unconstitutional to hear this because he's out of office. So one question I have is, okay, they're going to hear all this evidence. Are any of the senators going to change their minds if they had to vote today and then they had to vote after all the evidence? Do you think any of them will actually change the way they're going to vote? Or is it just all a big bunch of show and it doesn't matter at all? They're going to vote the same way regardless.
Yeah, that's a great question, Wes, and it goes really to the heart of what really I think is a central issue in an impeachment. Is it a political proceeding or is it a legal proceeding? And if it's a legal proceeding, then you have a motion to dismiss, and sort of the legal standard for that would be, is there anything in here that, if proven, would establish the case? And it's a very high standard in terms of succeeding on a motion to dismiss, at least in civil court it is. If it's a political proceeding, then the vote, 45 votes, Republican senator votes to dismiss, makes a lot of sense, because they're just saying, hey, politically, and they're sending a message to the former president, we're with you on this. I always find it interesting when a senator says, well, this is unconstitutional, because as we know, as lawyers, the Supreme Court is the ultimate determination making body of whether something is or is not unconstitutional. And every senator, I think, in the Senate today, except for the brand new ones, have voted on a piece of legislation at some point in their careers, whether in the House or in the Senate, that was declared unconstitutional. And so it's one thing to say that, but without the analysis of it, it's hard to know. I've seen great legal authorities on both sides of this issue. Judge J. Michael Ludig, formerly the Fourth Circuit, then I went on to become the general counsel at Boeing, has come out and said, you really can't do this. I think it was him that said you can't, but also Jonathan Turley, who testified at the prior impeachment, definitely has said, you can't do this, it's unconstitutional. But then you've got people like Michael McConnell, who's formerly a judge on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, now a professor at Stanford, who's saying there's absolutely a way to do this, because there's no question that the impeachment itself by the House was of a then sitting president, and that it's proper. It's a proper quote unquote indictment. So the Senate is obliged to hold the trial. And then you get into a whole bunch of other factors, which we've heard about quite a bit, that may be worth discussing is, well, what happens if we decide yes on this or convict, and what happens if we decide no? What's the fallout? What are the people thinking? And so senators are in a little bit of a difficult role, because some of them are lawyers, some of them are not. This is quasi-legal, but it's also mostly political. It's also a fundamental duty of the Senate to try all the impeachments. And granted, they can't remove the former president from office, but they still do have one sentence they can impose, which is barring Donald Trump from holding future public office under the laws of the United States. So it is not moot, and I have not heard anybody say, well, it's moot because he's no longer president. They're simply saying this probably isn't a good idea for us to do this at this time. Let's move on.
Yeah, I've seen, great legal minds on both sides with it's constitutional or it's not constitutional. Like anybody I see where they say, oh, this is a no-brainer, you can, or this is a no-brainer, you can't. I'm like, oh, okay. He's clearly saying that for the press. It's way more complicated than that. I mean, because I did dig into this quite a bit, and it was definitely not clear to me on which way it should go.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, the Senate could continue, and it could be tested eventually in a court such as the Supreme Court of the United States. At least as I understand things, if the Senate were to convict Donald Trump and impose a sentence that he was unable to ever hold office again under the laws of the United States, and if Donald Trump were to run for public office again, for president or for senator or whatever, and was elected, then there would theoretically be a lawsuit that would be brought against him, and they would say, you can't hold this office, you've been impeached. That would then make its way through the trial court, the circuit court, and up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court would have to decide whether or not that was actually a truly upheld conviction or not, and whether the actual proceeding was constitutional or not constitutional. Now, I don't think it'll ever go that far. Or you could see, Donald Trump throwing his hat in the ring and some other candidate filing a lawsuit against him from an injunction and saying, hey, he can't even hold office, so he can't run for office and take away my potential voters because he's barred, and have it go up that way through that process, which is probably more likely.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I've always read the impeachment clause and that part of the Constitution as, well, I think that's to remove someone from office. And if they had any kind of criminal liability, that's still there. If they have any civil liability, that's still there. This is really just to get somebody out of office. So this is kind of to me, it's it's a great law school exam question. He was in office, we impeached him, now he's out. Can you still do it? Because everybody knows the real goal is that they don't want him to run again. And that's really what they're all going after. I mean, I think that's what everybody really wants, is we don't want him to run again. So, but I don't know, like reading the Constitution, I'm not sure that was what it was meant for. It was like, well, you can remove him from office and disqualify him, but I don't read the or. You can remove him or you can disqualify him. I think
think you're right. I think if it's a sitting official, you have to definitely remove, and then you can decide as a secondary issue and also bar from future office. If it's not a sitting official, you still have the other remedy left, which is barring from future political office. And I've heard some of these theories of, well, what if we go back and we were to impeach and try Hubert Humphrey or uh, some other former president, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, somebody, or some other public office holder, vice president, president. Except those people are dead, and so in truly that case it would be moot. So those theories really don't hold water for me. It's either you're dealing with this person today, and there's always a limited number of still living presidents and vice presidents. I mean, there's 5 living presidents, former presidents right now. And what are you going to impeach them for? Something they did in office? Has evidence come out? I mean, at least the benefit of this proceeding, if you want to call it that, is that there is a written document that outlines charges, and it's there for the Senate to consider. So we'll see. And when you talk about the political side of it, if I were a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio or some other Republican senator, maybe Josh Hawley, and I wanted to run for president in 2024, and I wanted to really talk about knives out politics here, then convict the president and bar him from future office. And that clears the lane for me and my candidacy, if you're one of those senators, because now I no longer have to run against Donald J. Trump. He's barred. And it's very personal, and it's very perhaps mean-spirited, but that's the reality of it. Get him out of the way.
I mean,
get him out of the way.
And I think they also could be, but they probably would be afraid of losing that block of Trump voters if they pissed off all that group. So it definitely would be, they'd have to be a very calculated, but I could totally see politicians doing something like that. I mean,
it's very self-interested. Either way, it's self-interested. It's self-interested to vote to dismiss the charges because you don't want to anger a block of voters for your own selfish interest because you want them in a future run for office. But it's also in your self-interest, if it comes to that, assuming there's a plausible set of evidence that's developed that would enable you to cast a conscientious vote to convict, to get that person out of your way for a future office holder. I also wonder sometimes, Wes, just as a political matter, where are those folks going to go? I mean, if you tick off a block of Trump supporters, there's a pretty limited group right now of people, I think, at least that are plausible Republican candidates for office in 2024. Where are they going to go? Nikki Haley? Are they going to go to Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz? So it's really about these folks who want to run for office in some ways deciding not to concede that group of voters to some other viable candidate. And I'm not saying any of those folks are viable candidates, at least at this stage, but all of them have expressed some interest in at least putting their hats in the ring. Right.
Now let's get back to whether this is a high crime or misdemeanor, and just talk a little bit about that. So, the article of impeachment was incitement of insurrection as a high crime and misdemeanor. So, defining exactly what the Constitution meant by high crime and misdemeanor is not a really easy task.
Right.
Where it's and I don't know if it was Gerald Ford who said this, but it's I think really it comes down to whatever the people in Congress and also the Senate are willing to define as a high crime and misdemeanor, which because it is a political question and they can't appeal that part of it.
Sure.
Which I think is, it's a little dangerous because we don't want to end up having an executive branch that's just going to end up being under control of the legislative branch because they can just remove him whenever they want because they can decide whatever the crap they want is a high crime and misdemeanor. So, I think that the constitutional, the founding fathers meant for that to be a high bar. Like they did not want that to be an easy thing, but it's I think that's a really hard term to define, just because even if they define it wrong, the Supreme Court, I think they've said it's a political question. We're not going to review it, which kind of means you kids do what you want, which is not, I mean, that's not super helpful. Like, I
Well,
don't
it
know.
is a difficult term to think about, because when we think of misdemeanors, we think of jaywalking or prostitution or something like that doesn't rise to the level of a larceny or a burglary or a physical assault or murder or something. But my understanding is that the term does not necessarily mean misdemeanors as we think about misdemeanors today, and high crimes is the modifier on crimes. High crimes was to indicate that it needs to be something pretty significant. And yet there's a whole range of activities that could be qualifiers for impeachment. I mean, imagine you had a president who was elected and then simply said, I really don't like this job, but the people voted for me and I don't want to resign, but I'm going to go live in Barbados, just let the bureaucracy, the so-called deep state, I'm just going to let them run things. And if you need me, call me and I'll be there. So, a president who just sort of abandons his or her role has arguably committed a high crime or misdemeanor, because they've turned their backs on this country. They're not doing their job. And certainly, I don't think anybody would doubt that that's an impeachable offense. And if you turn that around sort of on the different side, if the president were found to be a mobster or something, and to have paid somebody off to go kill a senator, for example, and murder a senator, certainly that's a high crime and nobody would think about that. But we can't necessarily think about crimes and misdemeanors in the way that we think about the penal code. So if there is a crime that's been committed and it's the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, well then by all means that probably is impeachable. But that's not really the standard that they're using or the definition they're using. It's a much broader range of potential bad activities that the executive could engage in. And I will say the Congress over the last 20, 30, maybe more years has really conceded a lot of its authority as a branch that does exercise oversight over the executive branch. They are supposed to oversee the executive. They are supposed to be a check on the executive and executive power. But because they're unwilling to compromise, they've sort of just let the president take that authority, and in a power vacuum, someone's going to grab it. And so I think that's the balance that we're seeing play out here. I wish Congress was more effective and more overt in its willingness to exercise oversight over the executive branch. I mean, we don't have a king on purpose.
All right. So in the article of impeachment, they said that the high crime and misdemeanor was incitement of insurrection on January 6th. Now, as I was reading that, to me, when I first saw that, I thought, it seems like if I were a lawyer drafting that, I probably would have put in some more alleged high crimes and misdemeanors. I was kind of surprised that they went just for incitement of insurrection, just because I feel like that's going to be a tough. People are going to think about, okay, incitement of insurrection. So let's look at what kind of speech this was. Was this a speech that is permitted by the First Amendment, freedom of speech, or was it not? I think a lot of people out there are their kind of gut reaction is, well, it was dumb to say. Like, okay, well, that's not really the legal test. I mean, but most people just feel like it was dumb to say, so therefore he should be guilty. But, we're lawyers and we have laws, and this is supposed to be, a legal proceeding, an impeachment trial. So maybe they should have a separate question. Was this dumb? Just to make people like, yes, everybody agrees it was dumb and he shouldn't have said this. But his speech, the words in itself, if you look at what the freedom of speech entails, and I checked this out a while ago, and I think Brandenburg versus Ohio is the case that controls this, which is I'm going to have to look at notes. But I actually looked this up because it kind of defines what the contours of freedom of speech are. Let me see.
I'm worried you're going to give me a citation to the U.S. reports.
No. I'm sure that you probably know this, but so the new test, so the present status of the freedom of political speech, I think is currently the test is a two-part test, which is the advocacy is directed to inciting or producing an imminent lawless action, and the advocacy is also likely to incite or produce such action.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what the test is, whether the speech was okay. But I don't know. Are we going to be talking about that in the Senate, or is it just going to be mostly it was dumb and he pissed a lot of people off, therefore let's get
Yeah.
him?
Yeah, again, when I think of what happened on the 6th, and I happened to have been off work that day, and I was watching the proceedings, and flipping back and forth between, channels and Barney reruns, and and I saw really what happened in real time. And did I think it was an insurrection? Do I think that definition is right? Yeah, I do think it was an insurrection because there were a group of people who crossed the lines and did not. Well, they trespassed and they violently attacked the Capitol building, and they were looking for members of Congress. Some had violent intent, some had no intent, and we know that based upon the words that they were using and the recordings that have come out. So the problem with that impeachment article for me is not the word incitement, or I'm sorry, is not the word insurrection, because I think it was an insurrection. It was the word incitement, and incitement comes in all flavors. It's that old thing, well, Wes, why did you do that thing? Well, my friend told me I should, or my friend encouraged me to. Well, if your friend told you to jump off a cliff, would you do it? And so if the president had said, go to the Capitol, put up a gallows, and I want you to find Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence and hang them and shoot them, if that had been the words, then certainly I think it's absolutely clear that there's an incitement to an insurrection. But the words didn't say that. That's not what was said. And to try to determine the intent that the former president had when he spoke those words, I don't think that in fact that crossed a line. And I think at some point he was probably told by his lawyers during the course of that day that he needed to go out, make a statement, and he said something to the effect of, go home and obey the police officers, and so there is a defense there, to say, hey, well, if he did incite them to violence or incite them to insurrection, he kind of changed his mind by telling people to go home and obey the police officers and respect them. So I think that's a problem. The secondary problem, Wes, is there's a reason we don't let the victims of crime draft the indictments and decide to bring charges, because every tiny little thing would be blown up out of proportion. And so, but here we had sort of the victims, if you will, and not sort of, they were the victims. They were members of Congress. They were there. The folks came into that building where they work and perform the work of the United States. They're the ones who drafted this. They're the ones who lived through what could have been really a hellish experience. And so I have to think that just whether consciously or unconsciously, their own experiences as quote unquote victims of that day bled over into the drafting of the charge. And I know Jamie Raskin, I think it's Jamie Raskin, one of the drafters, former constitutional law professor and all that, but he still was a victim. And usually, what is that? We tell people only a fool represents themselves. Don't try to be your own lawyer. And they're kind of trying to be their own lawyers. They would have been better served, I think, by asking a more neutral party to come in, perhaps a prosecutor, and draft the statement for the impeachment article in a little bit more specific terms, if you will.
Yeah, I think I was trying to check the language here to see exactly what was said. I looked in at least, I think that the language that they reiterated in the article of impeachment was the article of impeachment said that he reiterated false claims that, quote, we won this election and we won it by a landslide. That was one quote. And then another quote.
But what's that supposed to prove? Does it say what was that? What's that supposed to prove?
I think that was part of the incitement of the mob.
But
That they
people have
had in
been
the
reading
article.
that on social media and in newspapers, have been reading that big lie, which, I mean, come on, it's a lie. The election is over. It was won by Joe Biden and all that. So repeating a lie doesn't incite someone.
Right.
It doesn't have any bearing on my status as a sentient being and my actions. I mean, you can tell me the big lie and I might get angry and I might get upset. I might say, yeah, we've got to do something about this, but it doesn't mean I'm going to grab a hatchet and march to the Capitol, so to speak. So I don't know why that matters so much. That was I don't see how that as
Yeah.
a motivating force for the actions that some people took.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I haven't had a chance to look at it, but the brief that the let's see, managers of the impeachment just filed, I think that just came out today, right?
Yeah, I
The
have not looked at them either.
trial memo from the House of Representatives. I haven't had a chance to look at that yet, but I'm curious to see how that, what they kind of try to lay out in this brief. Is it going to be something that's going to be like a legal memorandum that someone would file in court, or is this going to be more of something for public consumption in the press and on Facebook, not really related to what the law is? And if I had
Well,
to guess,
we
if I
probably,
had to,
yeah, both know the answer to that. It's gonna contain a preface that's gonna have all the inflammatory language in it, and then it's going to lay out in more dry terms probably the actual actions and tie them. The difficulty is going to be, again, tying specific words that the former president spoke with specific actions that took place at the Capitol. And it's interesting because in the standard jury charge, if this were a court proceeding, one of the instructions the judge gives every single trial, whether it's a criminal trial or whether it's a civil trial, is, basically don't let your passions overtake you. Don't let your anger or your feelings about this affect your judgment as to whether there is, in a civil trial, a preponderance of the evidence, or in a criminal trial, evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict. And so this is supposed to be done deliberately and not with emotion and with passion. And I'm afraid that the more passion that the House managers bring to it, the more that's going to turn off. If there's anybody sort of in the middle, it's going to turn them off. It certainly turns me off. I mean, it's like, just say the facts and say what they were. I don't need your embellishment. I don't need your adjectives and your adverbs. Just tell me the facts. Full stop. And I'm an adult. I can make up my own mind. I have common sense. And certainly the members of Congress and Senate have common sense. They're grown-ups, they're adults, they have life experiences. You don't need to embellish it with a bunch of adverbs and ridiculously inflammatory language.
right, yeah, I totally agree. I feel like, give us the facts and explain how those facts apply to the law relate to incitement of insurrection, and how that is a high crime and misdemeanor. And but I'm guessing that this whole trial is going to be televised. Is it?
I'm sure it will be somewhere, probably not with the level of attention, given that the outcome doesn't have the same ramifications that the other impeachment proceeding had. I mean, there was a possibility there of it was never really a possibility of conviction, but there was a possible outcome had there been a conviction of removal from office and a barring from future office. And there's, again, because of the items we've talked about, I don't think it's necessarily great TV. It could be.
Yeah. Maybe for me and you, like lawyers that are kind of dull, would be like, oh, yay, I can't wait to watch this.
What was that meme that went around a few years ago? Ain't nobody got time for that. Because that's kind of how I feel. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd be, a political pundit or a legal pundit, and I'd be sitting around on all these talk shows, and that would be my job, is to watch other people and then talk about them. But it's not. So those of us have real lives and real jobs can't really afford it. And when 6 or 7 o'clock rolls around, I'm not going to roll the TiVo and watch the replays.
Yeah. So uh, so what do you think as far as after this trial? Do you think that any senators would change their minds based on evidence presented or testimony presented, or whatever they think right now will be exactly the way they vote when that trial is over?
I think there could be some mind changing, really, among those that I would consider more in the middle. I mean, sort of my theory of politics has been the last little while, both people and politicians, is that there's really a sort of a crazy 15% on the left, and there's a crazy 15% on the right, and then the craziness sort of diminishes as you get to the middle. So there's a core middle maybe of of maybe 30 people in the Senate, perhaps, who obviously are self-interested and have their own political motivations. But I think they're persuadable, that those maybe 30 in the middle, possibly. Maybe there's only 20. I'd have to really sit down and do the counting, but it's possible. The thing is that sort of irks me about this whole thing is what I think most fair-minded people want is just simply accountability. They want some accountability. They know that the president said a lie, and by the time, really mid-November came around, the election was over. There's really never anything to doubt that. There was no real evidence. There was clips of video that had been slightly edited or heavily edited. It was really, for most fair-minded people, it was over back then. And then the subsequent events that took place over, say, the next 6 weeks or so, really were pretty outrageous in terms of comparison to the rest of the history of our republic. And so, should there be accountability for that because it built up to a point where it really boiled over? Yeah, I think that's what sort of citizens are looking for, and our leaders in Congress are really doing us a disservice, because there is a way to express the dismay. There is a way to express their disapproval at the president's actions, former president's actions, short of impeachment and short of conviction. But instead, they sort of, in my mind, overpled the case, overcharged the case. And they ought to be looking for a way to simply come together and unify around the two or three things that they have in common, and issue a statement, a vote of censure, whatever it might be, however strongly worded. If they could just agree on censure and then fiddle with the words around that, I think the country would be a whole lot better off. We could move past it. We could get away from the TV camera folks, who are just angling to get another slot on CNN or Fox News, and get really to the heart of the matter: is hold him accountable in some public way and then move forward. But this looking behind, I think, is not very healthy for a lot of us.
So I think we mentioned earlier that we hope that the prosecutors would just focus on the law, like the facts to support the law and why they think that's a high crime and misdemeanor. I also feel like, I hope that the defense team would just focus on the same things, the facts, and why
Yeah.
it would not be incitement of insurrection, or why it wouldn't be a high crime and misdemeanor. But I wonder if we might see some voter fraud things brought in by the defense, which I don't know that that's relevant at all to this impeachment trial, but I still wonder if that might be brought in. And the reason why I say that is because just recently, Donald Trump's defense team, I think he had some attorneys who bowed out and some other attorneys just stepped in. And I believe I read that some sources had said it was because they were being asked to talk about voter fraud allegations and they didn't want to. I don't know if there was a named source to that, but have you read that? Like, I read that, I think, a couple different places.
Yeah, I mean, that's the allegation. So Senator Lindsey Graham, here in South Carolina, recommended a guy down in Columbia, South Carolina, I think his name was Butch Bowers, to the president, and president sort of said okay, supposedly, and brought Bowers on, and he brought on a few other people. But the word on the street is the president wanted them to present a defense, which was really not a defense. It's really going on offense, or continuing on offense, and pushing this theory that Donald Trump actually did win the election. And again, there's no evidence for that. And a lawyer Any good lawyer that has no evidence realizes very soon that I can't go in and argue before a tribunal stuff that doesn't make sense. And in fact, this traces back to the days of Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and saying all sorts of outrageous things at news conferences, but refusing deliberately to say those same things in court before a judge because they're officers of the court as lawyers and they are subject to sanctions. So they're not going to do that and taint their entire career in court or put their law license in jeopardy by saying things in court that they cannot prove. And I've been in court proceedings where folks have told lies, and don't forget that the reason Bill Clinton was impeached but not convicted was for a lie, was for perjury, was for a false statement under oath. The other circumstances that led up to that really irrelevant to his proceeding, but that's what happened. So the lawyers aren't going to press an argument that they don't believe in. It's very, very hard to go into court, and I've been there and done that, to press an argument that you truly don't believe in just to sort of skate by to the very next day and get through to the next step in litigation or the next step in discovery. We can find more things out. So apparently he's brought on a couple of other people who are going to take more direction from him. And that may be what they want. But again, if you're Senator Leahy and you're conducting this, you're going to say, what does it matter? It's not relevant to what the president said on that day and relevant to what happened at the Capitol. You're going to try to prove here before the Senate that Donald Trump won the election. Do you have evidence to prove that? If not, it's all irrelevant and it's not coming in before this tribunal.
Yeah. That will be interesting to see what they bring up. I mean, I would hope they would stick to the facts that pertain to the allegations and leave out anything that's irrelevant. But I guess we'll wait and see.
Well, their best argument, I mean, there's really twofold. I mean, it's unconstitutional is one argument, and it's on legal grounds. And again, I have my doubts about that because there is a remedy that still exists that still is applicable because it's not moot. So I think they're saying unconstitutional when some of them really think it's moot, which means that no relief can be granted. Relief can be granted. So it's not moot, and I don't think it's unconstitutional proceeding. But that's one of the best arguments to press because it's already found some traction with senators that you're going to need to persuade. And the other argument is simply nothing that Donald J. Trump said on January 6th or in the days leading up to it directly led to people who were in Washington, D.C. that day of their own free will levying the kind of attack that was levied. There was no way that Donald Trump could have foreseen that people were going to breach the wall, breach the police lines, trespass, commit acts of vandalism, steal a laptop from Nancy Pelosi's desk, which I think was proven. I'm not really sure. I was following that story for a little bit. There's no way that he intended for those things to happen by his words. For him, this was one last hurrah. This is one last piece of entertainment. He's an entertainer. Don't take him seriously, or don't take him literally. It was just one more rally, and he was just gearing up the troops and had no thought or inkling that anything bad was going to happen physically to the Capitol building. And so I think those are the better arguments to be making. I don't know how the prosecutors, the House managers are going to sort of counter those other than trying to really, I think there's been some good video that's been developed that's really going to lay out the case that people thought they were there acting at the behest of Donald Trump. But that doesn't matter. I could go into my gas station and wave a pistol around and say, I'm here because Wes Austin told me to come and rob your store. But that doesn't matter. Even if you and I were talking about robbing the store yesterday or the day before, you couldn't have foreseen that was going to make me go do that.
All right. Well, thank you, Boyd, so much for joining me and talking about impeachment.
Hey, it's been a pleasure, Wes. Nice to chat with you about all things legal and political related. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming on. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And we will see you next week.